Okay, I'm back inside. I got my table set up, my camera set up, and we're ready to start this tutorial. I created an outline because I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things, and I usually forget some of the tips and hints that I've come up with when I'm talking from the top of my head. So we're going to follow this outline. You can see it on the screen here. Method for creating birdhouses from gourds, right? So initially, let me just talk about some real basic things for those of you starting out and wondering, where do I begin? You have to buy or grow your gourds, right? And then you have to dry them. So first of all, buying or growing, you can actually buy gourds online where someone has grown them and dried them and I think cleaned the skin. One such option is amishgourds.com. I think they're out of Pennsylvania. That's going to be your easiest but most expensive option. Next, you can go to your local farmer's market and ask around, ask the vendors who sell produce and say, are you guys going to be selling any birdhouse gourds in the fall? Okay, the birdhouse gourds come into season in the fall with the pumpkins and squash and Indian corn, right? So ask around. They might know somewhere where you can buy them, or they might be selling them at the farmer's market in the fall. The cheapest option, but the most work for you, is going to be growing them yourself. So you can buy the seeds online. They're called Birdhouse Gourd seeds. There's different shapes, obviously, different sizes. Pick what you want. You can buy the seeds at a garden center or nursery near you, usually. Now, the limiting factor in growing them is space. The gourds vine, and the vines can get up to 20, 30, 40 feet in length, okay? So if you don't have a lot of space or don't live on a farm, that could be a limiting factor. One option to get around this is to grow them on a trellis, right? So if you Google Birdhouse Gourds trellis, you're going to come up with a lot of photos and see different trellises of, that people made to grow birdhouse gourds on. Here's one on the screen that I found, sort of a nice trellis in front of a little house there, right? So they save space. The vines are growing up instead of out on the ground. The gourds are hanging down. So this is going to save you space if you're limited on land. The only other reason to do this, which we're not going to be concerned about, is if you want a perfectly or a more perfect shaped gourd. The gourds sitting in the dirt are going to be a little flatter on the dirt side, a little discolored on the dirt side. But these gourds hanging off a trellis in the air are going to be more perfectly shaped. And some people spend a lot of time decorating these to make them into art and craft objects. We're not going to do that. We're not concerned about that. The birds don't care how these gourds look, okay? So if you have the land, let these vine on the ground, right? I grew up on a farm. I just planted them in the ground and let the vines run in the field, right? So here is a photo of a section of a gourd field in the fall. The vines are dying, the leaves are dying. The gourds are fully grown. They need to be picked and dried, okay? So that is the next step. I'm not going to talk anymore about growing them. There's a lot of information online about how to grow them, how to deal with pests, how to deal with downy mildew, powdery mildew, vine borers, squash bugs, cucumber beetles, all that good stuff that you're going to have to deal with if you grow these. But they're actually not too difficult to grow once you know some tricks and once you've done it, right? Anyway, you can find that online. The next thing we're concerned about in the process of making birdhouses out of birdhouse gourds is drying these. So you've got your gourd, you cut off the stem if you're growing it, you pull it out of the field or you buy it at the farmer's market. These things are going to be really heavy, right? I don't know how much this would weigh, 20 pounds maybe. If you cut these open when they're green, they're going to look like a pumpkin or acorn squash, butternut squash on the inside. So the drying process is going to allow us to do two things, right? It's going to dry the skin. The green skin is going to dry, and we're going to be able to take that off later. And it's going to dry the inside. The meat of the gourd and the seeds are going to pull together and dry, and it's going to allow us to take those out so that the bird has a cavity in which to nest, okay? So how to dry these? Basically, all I did was take some water and a cloth and wipe off the dirt and the dead leaves. I lived on a farm, as I said. I had some old sheds and barns on the land, and I set these on some shelves in the barn or the sheds and let them sit there for a number of months, and some of these I'm just getting to 15 years later, okay, because I just didn't have time to process them all. Once they dry, how do you know when they're dry? Okay, so you're going to buy these or grow these in the fall, let them sit the rest of the fall, the winter, the spring. Early spring, if you want to start processing these and put them out for the birds that are going to be coming in the spring to nest, you're going to know if these are dry by the skin is going to be brown, flaky. Some of it's going to be black where the mold and fungus grew on the skin, right? If you see in the picture here, in between the dried skin, you can see the shell. The shell is going to be a light brown. The gourd obviously is going to be light. If it's completely dried on the inside, you may even hear the seeds rattling around like a cha-cha. But if you see any wet or damp spots, or it's really heavy on one side, let it keep drying. Also, some of these gourds may have very thin shells, and the shell will have caved in under itself. Those gourds, the shells are too thin, throw those away. So that's how you're going to know if your gourd is completely dried, okay? Now, some little things that you may come across or you may have heard, should you hang these from the stem and dry them? And I say maybe. I never did that because I had shelving and other places to lay these on in a barn. But you could perhaps hang these. The only thing I would watch out for is that when you tie a wire or string around these, the skin on the stem will dry and shrink and come off. The stem itself will shrink a little bit as it dries, and so whatever you've tied around this will not have as tight of a hold, and it may slip, right? And the gourd may fall off during the drying process, hit the ground, and crack. So watch out for that if you want to dry these from the stem, okay? I read somewhere where a site recommended drilling a hole somewhere in your gourd so that the inside can air out and dry better. I never did that. I never needed to. The gourds dried just fine without a hole. And another problem I think that the hole would create during the drying process is that it would allow bacteria and mold or fungus to get inside the gourd and then rot it from the inside out, okay? So by not drilling a hole in this, you sort of have a hermetically sealed inside where it's going to lose moisture from the inside out. But drilling a hole in this is just allowing mold and bacteria to get in. I don't know how that would work. If you have a lot of gourds, you may want to try it out on one or two, drill a hole and see if they dry better. But you don't have to. I don't recommend it if you just have a couple gourds, right? Don't drill a hole in them. Rotating while they dry. So when you set them on a shelf, okay, don't set them on top of each other. Give them some room to breathe. Rotating, you know, maybe every week or two, rotate it a quarter turn. I never did that. I never needed to. They turned out fine, but it's definitely not going to hurt if you rotate them, right? We talked about how long, at least a few months, that fall, winter, and early spring. Check them out. I told you how to tell if they're dry or not. Now, the one last thing I want to talk about for some length about drying is the use of bleach. I never used bleach, but you will read about almost every site recommends using bleach, and I think a lot of this is sort of like an urban legend that is repeated and repeated by people who have never really done this but want to write a blog or a little tutorial on it, and they read someone else's blog or tutorial that says use bleach, so they say use bleach. But anyway, so when this gourd is drying, the skin is going to rot and dry, and during that process, of course, there's mold spores, there's bacteria everywhere. They're going to eat away that skin and dissolve it and grow on it, right? I never used, and so anyway, let's talk about the reasons to use bleach, or the alleged reasons to use bleach. It kills the mold and bacteria, right? Now, The only reason to use bleach, in my opinion, is if you're going to dry these inside in your basement or an attached garage or someplace where people are living or going to be going through quite often, okay? Because you're going to have mold spores, right? So that is the only reason, and you will, wipe it down with bleach and, maybe weekly or bi-weekly check these. If they're starting to grow a lot of mold in your basement or garage, wipe them down with bleach. That will kill the mold and bacteria and reduce the spores, okay? But I never did that because these were in a barn outside, so I never used bleach for that reason. The other reason I never used bleach is because here's a really good example of the coloration left by the fungus, okay? All these mottled areas, dark spots, squiggly lines, okay? If you can see that, those are permanent colorations of the shell created by the mold and bacteria growing and eating the decaying skin, okay? Let me say this. I like the way this looks, okay? I like the character that it gives the shell. If you do not like that coloration, then you want something that looks more uniform and uncolored, then yes, use bleach, okay? Kill the mold and bacteria. You won't get as much coloration from, obviously, the mold and bacteria, and you'll get a more uniform colored gourd if that's what you want. Another reason I didn't use bleach, okay, was, and I'll show you pictures of this later, the mold and bacteria, as it eats away the skin, it actually helps remove it and separate it from the shell, which will make it a lot easier to remove it later, as I will show you during the skin removal segment of this video. So basically that's it, okay? Unless you're growing these in your basement or an attached garage, do not use bleach, right? I recommend not using it. Or if you do not like this coloration left by the mold and bacteria, then you can use bleach during the drying process. But, it's an added expense, it's added time, you're dealing with bleach. You're not going to get this nice mottled coloration that gives these gourds character, okay? It's going to make it look a little more natural, I think, like an old snag of a tree that birds would nest in naturally. So all in all, I think, in addition, the bacteria helps eat away and remove the skin from the shell. So for all those reasons, unless you're growing these inside, you don't need to use bleach, okay? All right, I think I've covered that enough. The next thing is how to remove the dried skin after these are completely dried, okay? We want to remove the skin so that we can stain or paint and seal these so that we can use these year after year. But we need to remove the skin first. So I am going to get some tools and other items up here that I use that are going to help you remove the skin very easily and quickly. And once I do that, I'm going to start the next segment.